Hello everyone. This is unit 1, and in this unit we will study collection of data. Okay, so what happens in most of the business situation, or you can say in every business situation, you have to take certain decisions. Okay, but those decisions you cannot take just randomly, just like that, based on your gut feeling or based on your hunch. So those decisions should be backed up by certain, you can say, certain source. Okay. So why you are taking those decisions, you have to be answerable for that. Okay, there should be a base on which your decision is based. Okay, so for that decision, what do the companies do? They collect data. Okay, so they collect data, and then on the basis of that data, they make the decisions. So this unit is a very basic unit in which we will study how to collect data. Okay, collecting data, as a name seems, it may seem easy, but it's really not very easy to collect the data. There are certain challenges involved. Okay, so in this unit we'll cover all those aspects, that how the data is collected and how careful should be in collecting the data, how to edit your data, and so on. So all such things we'll cover in this unit. Okay, so let us start. So after studying this unit, you'll be able to appreciate the need and significance of data collection. Okay, so you will understand why the data collection is needed. And you'll be able to distinguish between the primary data and the secondary data. So there are basically two types of data. We'll study in detail both of them. And then you'll know also the different methods of collecting the data, like there's questionnaire method, there's an interview method, there is a mailing method. So many methods are there. Many methods are there. So we'll discuss each and every method in detail. Okay, and then we'll understand, or we'll know how to design a suitable questionnaire for collecting the data. And then once the data is collected, we'll know how to edit the data, and whatever should be the sources of the secondary data, and so on. And then we'll conclude with the concept of census and SAM. So these are some of the objectives of this unit. Okay, so giving an introduction of this unit, so I would like to say that to make any decision, as I told you, will have to need data. That decision should not be based on your gut feeling or what you feel or what a manager of a company feels. It should be backed up by some data. So what is data basically? Data is basically the facts which are expressed in quantitative form, not only in quantitative form, in qualitative form also. Okay, and any statistical investigation is successful based on how properly you have collected the data. If you have made mistakes in data collection itself, then obviously your analysis and your results will be wrong. So you have to be very, or investigator has to be very careful in the data collection. Okay, and then so what method you are choosing to collect the data, that also plays a very important role. So basically, the data collection is a very basic and a very important activity in decision making. Okay, and so in this unit, we'll study, as I told you, different methods of data collection and what are the types of data and how to collect those data. Then once you have collected the data, how to edit those data. So all these things we'll be studying in this unit. Okay, so you'll find in this unit that the data collection was which seems a very simple activity. It involves its own challenges, but on the other hand, it's very interesting to understand how the data is collected, what are the various challenges in data collection, and then what are the different types of data. So once you will get a hold of all these things, you'll be able to proceed with further steps, like once the data is collected, how to present that data, and so on. So this chapter is a very basic and a very essential chapter to understand the further all the units in this course. Okay, so we'll discuss each of them in detail. So basically there are two types of data. The first is the primary data and the second is the secondary data. Okay, So what is primary data? So primary data is the data which is basically collected under the control and supervision of investigation. Okay, so this type of data, the investigator, he collects this data directly. Okay, so this is known as a primary data. So this is under the control and supervision of investigation. But what happens when the data is not collected directly? It is collected from some other sources, for example, from some websites or some other sources of data. It's some other internet sources which provide data, or some organization gives the data. So that is known as secondary data. So this type of data is not collected by the investigator. Okay, so primary data is collected by the investigator itself, and the secondary data is not collected by the investigator itself, but it is extracted from other sources. So these are the two types of data. Now, there are several methods of collecting the data. Okay, so if obviously if the investigator will collect the data, then it will be the primary data. So there are two methods of collecting the data. First is the observation method, and second is the questionnaire method. Okay, so what happens in the observation method? Let us see this method. So what happens in this method? The investigator will not ask any question, but he will simply observe. Okay, so he will simply observe the phenomena, whatever phenomena he's trying to investigate. He will observe that phenomena under consideration, and he will record the necessary data. Okay, so sometimes what happens, individual make the observation, and sometimes what happens that some mechanical devices make the observation. But one of the disadvantage of observation method is that it may be difficult to produce accurate data. Okay, so it may be difficult to produce accurate data in observation method. Why is this so? Because there are physical difficulties on the part of observer which may result in errors. So because of these limitations in the observation method, the questionnaire method is widely used. So this observation method is it's little bit difficult because the investigator has to observe the phenomenon and then record the data, and it may be difficult to produce accurate data in this case, and it is very time consuming also. So the second method is the questionnaire method. Okay, this questionnaire method is divided into three parts. That is the personal interviews, then the questionnaire is mailed, and third is the telephone. So let us see all these three methods in detail. So what is the personal interview? So personal interview means face-to-face interview. Okay, so when the face-to-face interview is done, then it is known as personal interview. So what happens? The interviewer sits face-to-face with the respondent and records his responses. Okay, so the advantage in this method is that the information is likely to be more accurate and reliable. So in this method, more accurate and reliable information is possible. Okay, because what happens, whatever the doubts the interviewer has, he or she can clear it directly. So this is the advantage of personal interviews. Okay, the second is mailing the questionnaire. So what happens in mailing the questionnaire? There's a list of questions. Okay, so there's a list of questions which the investigator intends to be answered, and what does he or she does that he sends a list of questions to the respondents by mail, and the respondents are expected to fill in the questionnaire and send it back to the investigator. Okay, so how does sometimes this questionnaire is mailed directly, or if other times you must have seen that such type of questionnaires are attached to consumers' products. Okay, like putting them in newspapers or magazines. So this method is very useful when the field of investigation is very vast. Okay, there are too many people from which the data has to be collected. So in this case, you can't go and personally interview each and every respondent. So you can directly mail the questionnaire. So this is very useful when the field is very vast. Okay, But the thing is that in this case, the respondent should be literate, means they should know which type of question they are being asked and how to answer that question. Okay, then let us come to the third questionnaire method, that is telephone. So what happens in this method? In this method, the investigator will ask relevant question from the respondent over the telephone itself. This method is less expensive. Okay, so this method is less expensive. Okay, this method is less expensive, and but the disadvantage is that it has limited application because only those respondents can be interviewed who have telephones. But nowadays everyone has telephones, and moreover you can't ask a lot of questions on telephone, otherwise the person will not, who has to answer, he will lose his interest. Okay, so but whatever the disadvantages are there, if you keep aside those disadvantages, then the questionnaire method is a very efficient and a fast method of collecting data. Okay, so but there some serious limitations are there, which is that you can't ask very sensitive questions. Okay, like what is the income, or questions about age or personal life. So this type of questions should be avoided. Okay, because each person may interpret each question differently, and there may be errors and inadequacies in the data. So if you keeping aside all this disadvantage, this questionnaire method is a more efficient method of asking questions and collecting the data. So now let us discuss the designing of questionnaire. So the designing of questionnaire consists of several parts. First is the covering letter. Second is the number of questions should be kept to the minimum. Third is questions should be simple, short, and unambiguous. Fourth is questions of sensitive and personal nature should be avoided. Fifth is answers to questions should not require calculations. Sixth is the logical arrangement, and seventh is the cross-check and footnotes. So let us discuss each of this in detail. So coming to the covering letter. So every questionnaire should contain a covering letter. Okay, so this covering letter should highlight the purpose of the study, and it should assure the respondent that everything will be kept confidential. Okay, so the information of the respondent should not be leaked, and it should highlight the purpose of the study. Okay, so what is the main purpose of the study? And the covering letter should be such that it should induce some motivation in the respondent. Means he should be willing to answer the questions. And at the end of that letter, means after reading that letter, the respondent should get a sense of satisfaction. Okay, so he should get a sense of satisfaction that he is involved in the study. Okay, so covering letter, the first three things should be remembered. First is it should be kept confidential. Second, it should contain the purpose of the study, and third is it should motivate the respondent. Okay, so these three things are important for covering letter. Okay, now let us see the second part. So number of questions should be kept to the minimum. Okay, why it is important? Because the fewer the question, the greater the chances of getting a better response. Okay, so if you have few questions, you have a better chances of getting a response. Okay, and all the questions will be answered in this case. Okay, but because if there's too many questions, then the respondent will feel disinterested. He will not feel interested to answer the question, and he may provide inaccurate answer. So it should be, the number of questions should be kept to a minimum. Ideally, the number of questions should be between 15 to 40. Okay, so even if the questions are more than 25, then they should be divided into various parts so that to ensure clarity. Okay, now coming to the third part. The question should be simple, short, and unambiguous. What do you mean by this? The question, it means the question should be simple, they should be easy to understand. Okay, so they should be easy to understand, and the answer should not confuse the respondent. Okay, so if suppose you are asking a question that are you literate? Now different people may have different meaning of literacy. Okay, so they may interpret literacy differently. For some, it may be the capacity to read and write, and some it may be that whether you have a university degree or whether you have a college degree and so on. So instead of asking, are you literate, you should ask that whether you have passed high school, graduation, post graduation, etc. Okay, and questions can also be of yes or no type or multiple choice questions depending upon the requirement of the investigator. So questions should be simple, short, and unambiguous. Now, fourth is questions of, as I've already told you, questions of sensitive or personal nature should be avoided. Okay, so the question should not be such that the respondent has to disclose any private or his personal information or confidential information, or any questions related to his income, sales, profit, material happiness. They should be avoided because there are high chances they would not be answered correctly. Then answers to question, they should not require calculations. If there are any calculation involved, people will absolutely leave it. If they are not interested, they will not answer these such type of questions. Okay, so they should not require calculations. Logical arrangement is also very important, so that there is a continuity of responses and the respondent does not feel the need to refer back to the previous question. Means it should not be such that the respondent has to refer to the previous questions. Okay, so it is desirable that the questionnaire should begin with some introductory questions. There should be some introductory questions, and that should be followed by some vital questions or important questions. Okay, and then it should conclude with some light questions so that the overall experience of the respondent becomes a happy one. And then cross-check and footnotes. So cross-check and footnotes are basically to check the reliability of the information. For example, if a question is asked related to income, so then if when a question related to income is asked, it is desirable to include a question, are you an income tax assessee? Okay, so they can check the reliability of the question. The first question can be like, for example, what is your income? And second, what is your income is not a very relevant question. You can ask that, do you earn or something? And then you can ask, are you an income tax assessee? So this will cross-check the questions. Okay, so there may be certain questions also which may create a doubt in the mind of respondent. So in such cases, it is desirable to give footnotes. So footnotes are small notes at the end, so that can clarify the question. Okay, so suppose the footnotes will clarify all the doubts which may emerge from the question. For example, if the question relates to income, like income limit like 1,000 to 2,000, 2,000 to 3,000. So if there is a question which asks that whether income lies in this band or in this band 2,000 to 3,000, then if a respondent is there whose income is exactly 2,000, then he should be clear that whether he has to put it in this band or this band. So in the footnote, you can mention that exactly 2,000 refers to which band. Okay, so like this, you have this cross-check, and cross-check means you can cross-check the questions by answering some related questions as we discussed for income and your and income tax assessment. And second is footnotes, that can clarify the doubt about the question which is being asked. So this is how a questionnaire is designed. So these are the important steps. So now let's discuss the pre-testing of the questionnaire. So once the questionnaire has been designed, you have to pre-test it. Okay, what do you mean by pre-testing? It means you have to take a pilot survey. Pilot survey means a small survey to check your questionnaire is formed correctly or not. Okay, so if you pre-test the questionnaire, then it will allow you for rectification of problems. If there are any inconsistencies or repetitions in the questionnaire, you can remove them. Okay, so if it is required, you can make the necessary modifications before administering the questionnaire. And if there are some irrelevant questions, then they can delete it. Or if you think that some more questions can be added, you can add those questions. Okay, so but one thing you have to remember is that the pre-testing should be done with utmost care. Okay, because otherwise unnecessary and unwanted changes may be introduced. And the second thing is, if the resources and time permits, then you can do a second pre-testing also. So you will get a greater reliability of results. Okay. So this is about pre-testing the questionnaire. Now coming to editing the primary data. So once the questionnaire have been filled and the data has been collected, so it is necessary to edit the data. So you have to edit the data, because editing the data should be done so to ensure completeness, consistency, accuracy, and homogeneity. So let us discuss each of these in detail. So what do you understand by completeness? So compare completeness, it means that each questionnaire should be complete in all respects. Okay, it means that the respondent should have answered each and every question. Okay, if some question has been left unanswered, then attempt should be made to contact the respondent and get the response. Okay, even if despite all the efforts, the answers to some important questions are not given, then such questions should be dropped. Okay, so ensuring the completeness is very important. Second is consistency. What do you mean by consistency? It means there should be no contradictory answers. Okay, there should be no contradictory answers. Contradictory answers may arise due to wrong responses by the respondent. Okay, so there should be not contradictory answer. For example, so these wrong responses may arise due to the carelessness of the respondent or the unwillingness to answer the question. For example, if there are two questions, that are you married? Okay. And the second question is, how many kids are there? How many kids do you have? Okay. So suppose in are you married, he puts no, and in how many kids he puts some number like 1 or 2 or whatever, then these two are contradictory answers. So such type of contradictory answers means there's some inconsistency in these questions, and they should be sorted out with the respondent. Okay, so this is about consistency. Then coming to accuracy. Then by accuracy, it means that the questionnaire should be checked for the accuracy of the information provided by the respondent. Okay, and you note here that this is the most difficult step, but this is the most important at the same time, because if the answers are inaccurate, then you will get misleading results. Then fourth is homogeneity. What do you mean by homogeneity? Homogeneity means all the questions that they have been understood in the same sense by all the respondents. Okay, for example, if you are asking about your income, of the respondent income, then it would be wrong if some of the respondent give their weekly income, some report their monthly income, or some report their yearly income. So it should be very clear that which type of income is being referred to. Okay, so whether it is weekly income, monthly income, or yearly income. So it should be very clear. Otherwise, if it is left unambiguous, if it is confusing, then you will get a different responses, and consequently you will get a wrong result. So these 4 steps are very important when it comes to editing primary data. Then talking about the sources of data. So sources of data is that it means that there are 2 sources of secondary data. First is the published source, and second is the unpublished source. So what do you mean by published source? So there are a number of national and international organizations which collect statistical data, and they publish their findings in the statistical reports periodically. Okay, some of the national organizations which collect and publish such data are, for example, it is CSO. What do you mean by CSO? Central Statistical Organization. Or the other organization is NSSO. NSSO means National Sample Survey Organization. Where many such organizations are there which publish the data. And one more example is ICAR. What do you mean by ICAR? Indian Council of Agricultural Research, and so on. So all such organization, they publish their data which can be used. Now, unpublished sources means that they do not publish the data. Okay, a major sources of statistical data produced by government, semi-government, private, and public organization is based upon the data drawn from the internal records. Okay, so that data is based on the internal records which is not published. Okay, and such data is very cheap as compared to the primary data. So some example of internal records are like employees payroll, amount of raw material, cash receipt, cash book, and so on. Okay, so but one thing is that having access to unpublished source is very difficult because it is not published, and so you have, if you want unpublished data, then you have to request that particular organization whether they will allow you to access their data or not. Okay, so there are basically two sources of secondary data: published and unpublished sources. Now there are certain precautions which should be exercised in the case of secondary data. Okay, first is suitability, second is reliability, and third is adequacy. So what do you mean by of all these terms? So first of all, the user should be extra cautious in using secondary data, and he should not accept it just like that, because it may be full of errors. It may be the bias may be there, or the sample size may be inadequate. So many problems may be there. So before using such data, the following aspects should be considered. Now let us see what do you mean by suitability. So by suitability means that the investigator should ensure that the data available is suitable for the purpose of inquiry at hand. Whatever question you have, research question you have, for that question, the data which you are collecting or which you have should be suitable. Okay, it should justify the nature and the scope of investigation. Then second is reliability. So reliability, it's very important to determine how reliable is the data and how confidently you can use it. Okay, so for checking the reliability, you can check whether the collecting agency that is unbiased, and whether it has a representative sample or not, or data has been properly analyzed or not. So you have to check all these for reliability. Then third comes the adequacy. Adequacy means the data from the secondary sources may be available, but its scope may be limited. Okay, and it may not serve as a purpose of investigation. It means that it may be possible the data is not adequate. It may serve only a part of requirement for the investigator, and or the time period it should be, the time period of the data, it may be different, and the investigator is requiring a different time period. So in that case, it will be inadequate. So adequacy means it should be, first of all, it should meet all the requirements for the investigator, and it should satisfy whatever the research question he is trying to answer. So let us study the census and sample method. What is the census and sample? So basically, when secondary data is not available for the problem under study, so an investigator has to collect the primary data. Okay, so this collection of primary data can be done by two methods. First is the census, and second is the sampling method. Okay, so what is census and what is sampling? So in case of census, the investigator collects data about each and every item. Okay, so data about each and every item. Okay, so he collects data about each and every item. So this is known as census method or complete enumeration survey. Okay, but instead, if the investigator takes a sample, okay, he takes only a representative part of the population, which is known as a representative sample. Okay. So when he takes only a representative part of the population and makes inferences about the population through that sample, this is known as sampling method. Okay, so there are basically two methods, which are census and sampling. So each has its own advantages. So the advantage of census method is that information about each and every item is taken into consideration. Okay, and the information collected is more accurate in case of census. But the limitation in case of census method is it requires great deal of money and time, especially when the population is very large. It will require a great deal of money and time. And in certain practical situations, it is not possible to enumerate each and every unit of the population. So suppose if a investigator is carrying study about India, he cannot take each and every citizen of India. So he has to consider a sample in that case. So in such cases, sampling is used. Okay. So if a sample is representative of the population, then it yields usually yields a correct information about the total population. Okay, and you should know that out of the census and sampling method, the most popular method is sampling method. Why? Because it is more convenient, and secondly, census method is not every time possible in all the cases. Okay, so this concludes unit 1. So in this unit, basically what we studied, we appreciated the need and significance of data collection. So basically, we understood why data collection, why we collect data to make inferences about the population. And then we studied two types of data, the primary data and the secondary data. And then we studied different methods of collecting primary data. We studied that there were two methods. First was the observational method, and second was the questionnaire method. Two methods were there. Then we studied how to design a suitable questionnaire, then how to edit the primary data. We studied, okay, there were various methods of editing primary data such as completeness, consistency, accuracy, and homogeneity. And then we understood the concept of census versus sample. So this was all about unit 1. So here we conclude with certain questions about this unit. So please go ahead and try these questions. First is explain clearly the observation and questionnaire method of collecting primary data, and you have to highlight the merits and limitations. Then second is point out the advantage of telephonic method of data collection. Does it have any limitations? Then third is you have been directed by your employer to carry out a market survey to ascertain the probable demand for the new drug your company is going to introduce. Prepare a suitable questionnaire in this connection. State also the type of respondent you expect to cover. Okay. So please go ahead and practice these questions. All the best to all of you.